today's topic of conversation is going to be about the experience of being Hmong at DC Everest Senior High. And one of the aspects I guess we could talk about is the fact that we had 4 people and now we have 2. They had work to do. But
True. Target.
And so the first thing I wanted to do is just kind of start this conversation because it can be an awkward conversation and we can have a lot of hiccups and uncertainty about how to talk or what to say, or is it even appropriate to ask somebody, hey, what's it like to be Hmong? That sounds kind of like a strange question, which is part of the reason we want to do this, because I think it's a conversation that needs to happen, but we don't always do it. So the first thing I want to just ask is, do you feel like there's a difference between being Hmong at DC Everest High School versus being white or black or Hispanic?
I don't think there's any difference because I've never had like any racial discriminants in the school. We're like a pretty safe school and we're good about races and all of that. So.
All right.
Yeah, I think the same way. I think I haven't had any experience with that stuff too. I think Hmong people do have like that camaraderie. Like, oh, when you see another Hmong person, you can just kind of get together and just kind of talk. It's not as scary as just like talking to like another stranger.
Right.
But since you're Hmong, like, oh, hey, we have something similar, so at least we have something in common. So it's not as scary to walk up to a Hmong person and just be like, just talk.
So go ahead.
It's fine.
I was gonna say, so there's that immediate recognition within the Hmong community that you feel is part of what keeps you close together. Okay.
Savan, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, for me personally, this is I don't see much black people in this school. I'm not gonna lie. So I really I grew up with having interactions with multiple races, so it really doesn't change anything for me.
Yeah.
I never really had this fear of stranger danger kind of.
Right.
More often than not, my mother had to tell me, like, hey, relax a little bit, because I'd talk to strangers and walk up to them like I knew them.
Right.
I don't know, and I did deal with some racism at this school, but not here. It was more like the middle school.
Okay.
When we first threw all the elementary schools together, that wasn't a great time. But
Really?
yeah, I think it was just the way I don't know. It's like the way these kids were raised. I think mainly because like if you're only associated with people of your race, and then you kind of meet more like cultural differences and stuff like that. It kind of can be a little sour at first. It seems like because you're not used to the interaction. You don't know. Can I ask them what it's like to be black? Is that going to be offensive?
Right.
And oftentimes today it's like, ooh, that's offensive.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting. Do you feel like things were different when you were younger? The middle school experience, Tavan was, talking about his experience being a little bit more difficult at the middle school. What about you guys? Did you feel like that was a transition that was difficult?
Honestly, so I went to Mountain Bay.
Mm-hmm.
There was obviously some Hmong kids there, but not as much as like Weston.
Right.
So when I did get to the middle school, we became friends because I didn't know other Hmong people existed outside of my school.
Right. Really?
Right?
You didn't?
Right.
Okay.
So then when we got there was a lot of other Hmong people. Like I'd see like relatives and stuff, like cousins and stuff. But those are the only people that I actually knew that were Hmong. But then, like Kong, we're not related, but that was something to bond over, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's just like a kind of a clique thing. But it is what it is. And like me and Tavan, we've been day one buddies. Like we went to the same school. We've been together ever since like what? First grade? We rode the same bus. We did everything, right?
Yeah, I think, because I believe Nick introduced me to you.
Right.
So,
Nick who?
Hanson.
Oh, okay.
don't know.
Interesting.
He's gone.
So you guys
Yeah.
have known each other for a long time?
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't even know that.
Oh yeah, we've been.
Kong, what about your experience coming to the middle school? Anything different?
Not really. I came from Western, and that had like a pretty big Hmong population.
Mhm.
So I just kind of like group around them, and when I went to the middle school, I just kind of stayed around them, kind of surrounded myself around,
Right.
kind of like mutual friends with them. Yeah.
So I have two questions, but I'll see if I can remember both. One of them is that Weston. You both said Weston has a higher Hmong population. It does. You just look at the numbers, and you'll have a lot more percentage-wise at Weston Elementary that are Hmong kids versus the other elementary schools. Is there a problem at all with that? Do you think? Is that good? Is that bad? Does it create a different dynamic that has problems or benefits? Or I mean, there is a higher concentration there by quite a bit. What do you think about that?
So I think we'll go back to what Kong said, like when you surround yourself with the people you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to Mountain Bay. There was diversity, but a lot more white kids than minorities, let's say. So I got to know more white people than... Yeah, I got to know a lot more white people, but then far as... I don't know, I've never went to Weston, but I'm sure, Kong, you've been hanging around like Hmong people your whole life, right? Like
Yeah.
throughout school. Yeah.
Yeah.
Primarily?
Right.
Well, in Rothschild, there wasn't that many Hmong people, but I transferred to Weston like fourth grade. So yeah.
What you, Taban?
What are we talking about?
So, but let me ask that question in terms of, do you think that there's any problems that come out of that, or should it be done differently or anything like that? To have a school that has a much higher concentration, percentage-wise of Hmong versus the other middle schools, or is that just something that has to do with where people live?
Yeah, I think it's just a problem with where people live.
But is it a problem? That's, I
I
guess,
don't
part of the
know.
question.
I guess yes and no. I mean, Tavon said that the reason, he had like a rough time like transitioning was because all these other elementary schools didn't really have black students in their schools, so they're kind of ignorant to the fact. So, I mean, like, it is a problem, but I think I don't. Yes.
Yeah.
It's definitely a hard problem to solve, though, too, because, I mean, there are many different reasons for why people choose where they want to live.
Right.
And, like, we're just going to tell them no then? Oh, no, there's not enough diversity over here.
Well, right, and I don't even know that you need to do anything. I really am curious about what you have to say about it more than anything. But, you can always draw the school boundaries a little differently, too, and they are kind of weird. I don't know if you have ever seen them. We should look at a map sometime and see what the school boundaries are, because they are kind of strange sometimes. Like, it's not just neighborhoods. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And some of that's for diversity purposes. Some of it's for things like that.
Well, I think I could talk about that because me and Taban, we live pretty close towards like Weston. Like Weston is just down Camp Phillips, and that's all we need to do to get to school. But we ended up all the way over by Mountain Bay, and that's like pretty far.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Originally, my mother tried to get me into Weston, but we lived on the wrong side of the street.
Right.
So we had to go to
You were on
Mountain
the
Bay.
wrong side.
I was.
That's funny. Okay. Another question I had then that I actually did remember was you guys both talked about sort of this immediate recognition and bonding over the fact of being Hmong, right? Or you run into people like this and it's like, oh, okay, we have something in common. Does it sound weird if I say, I had immediate recognition and bonding with somebody because they were white?
I think people are just comfortable with seeing something that they're used to, right? Yeah.
What did you say? Is there a problem with that?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think if there's a majority of something and you are part of the minority,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's comforting to see that there's someone like you. And you can be in a room full of like Hmong people, Latinos, and then you see another white person. Like, oh, cool. Like, okay, that's good.
What I find really fascinating about that, though, is just like, this open and honest recognition of that. Sometimes it seems like when we're talking about different ethnicities living together and living in a diverse situation, it almost seems like when we talk about it that we're trying to tell people, or the message is sent sometimes that, like, if you feel more comfortable with a white person if you're white, or if you're Hmong and you feel more comfortable with a Hmong person than with the others, then somehow you're discriminatory. And what I hear you guys saying is, like, you don't necessarily see that. You see it as sort of a natural thing in that, if I'm a Hmong and I'm in a minority situation, I see another Hmong, I feel more comfortable immediately, right? That you shouldn't feel bad necessarily that you feel less comfortable with the white people.
You know what? I will say that Mountain Bay did teach me that diversity is a good thing, right? Because I had Hmong friends over at Mountain Bay, but there was also a lot of white people, and that's what I don't want to say white students. That sounds better, but there was a lot of white students, and maybe that's why I'm kind of whitewashed. Just maybe, just a little bit, but being around those people made me realize that we are all just like the same kind of people, right? Just different skin colors. But that never really affected anything because we all went to the same school and we had one common goal, just to go up.
Right.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Mountain Bay, it was, how do I want to phrase this? There was diversity to an extent,
Right.
but clearly there was a race that outweighed more.
Sure.
And when you're younger though too, it doesn't seem like race really matters. Like, I really didn't grow up thinking, oh, well, this kid's a white kid. It was just
Right.
like a friend.
Right.
And I think, I don't know, sometimes, like, with school teachings, like, sometimes it makes you think, and it makes me wonder even if, like, maybe that is also a cause for, like, racism. It's because they try to, like, make it where, like, it's kind of like you're pinned against one another, kind of. Like, you have to compete with black kids to get into this school, or white kids to get into this school. I don't know, it's just...
When do you think that started? Because I think I've wondered that too about school. Like, do we reinforce a narrative of ethnic separation rather than ethnic, maybe diversity? Do you know what I'm saying? When do you feel like that started?
What? What? No, confused.
So, here we go, Kong. So Tavon, well, you explain it to him. I don't need to put words in your mouth.
Well, basically, it seems like the schools sometimes, like, as we get older, somewhere there's, like, a transition where, like, instead of us all being united, it's like we're all, like, separate because of our race.
Do you see that through, like, history assignments? Like, oh, there's this guy, Martin Luther King Jr., and he said blacks weren't treated well, and...
I don't know. I think that's just like the evolution of society, and like how when you grow up, your brain grows, it gets bigger, and you have you can comprehend more. Like, because as a child, I didn't see that white kid as white, but now I see that white kid as white. I can comprehend that he has a different culture. He has different. He lived in a different environment, and I can be like, oh, we're different in that way.
And you only learn that difference over time.
Yeah,
as you grow.
You can kind of like comprehend it. You know, as when you're younger, you're just like, oh, hey, he's a kid like me. Cool. You know. I think as you just grow older, you can understand more and you learn more about yourself and other people. And I don't necessarily think it's like a race thing. I just think it's you want to surround yourself with things you like, and sometimes, differences in culture is not something like you're comfortable with, and so I guess there can be a divide because of culture,
Mm-hmm.
but not necessarily because of race or the color of your skin.
Marchi, I want to ask you about something you said earlier. Earlier, you said that you used the term whitewashed
Yes.
in reference to yourself. Can you talk a little bit about that? What do you mean by that?
So, what I mean by whitewashed is like some Hmong people, they're just raised to be Hmong people, right? They've never really had come in contact with other races, is what I'm saying, and especially like the white race. I'd say whitewashed because sometimes I spent more time at school than I did at home, and I spent more time with white people than I did with my own people, and kind of like got integrated into this
Mm-hmm.
this community that we have, right? And I don't know.
What types of characteristics, traits are we talking about when we're talking about being whitewashed versus being more traditionally Hmong? What are we talking about?
So I think definitely language starts to decline. Like when I was younger, all we did was speak Hmong, right?
At home?
At home. But then more and more as like we got older and we started spending more time at school and spending more time with other people, like English is a universal language. Well, I don't want to say universal, but like
Close.
it's like a common language that
Mhm.
everybody can share, right?
Good.
And like when I came into school, like kindergarten, I didn't know how to speak any Hmong, so that's why I went to ELL. They taught me how to speak English. So speaking English and speaking more English and applying that on top and speaking less Hmong, just
Mm-hmm.
we start to lose our language a little bit, and that's what I think whitewashed is coming to be.
I also think there's like some values that you kind of start to lose your grip on, because I think in Asian culture, like respecting elders is like a big thing. But as I see like more just Hmong kids like coming up, they're talking to these adults like they're like their friends. I'm like, how? Because I can never see just myself like really being friends with someone who's like way older than me, because I need to be respectful towards them, or that's just like a value I grew up with. And so there are some values that that are higher up and lower on being Hmong and Asian, and sometimes you lose that. That wouldn't necessarily be whitewashed,
Right.
but I think it's just kind of the evolution of growing into a new society.
Do you feel or see those cultural differences between yourself and your white peers? Like when you're in the classroom, do you see yourself or fellow Hmong as behaving differently, as reacting differently, as than your white peers?
I don't really think so. So we have two different types of people, right?
Sure.
People who try hard and achieve a lot, and then people who don't try as hard but maybe not so successful, right?
Right.
And then you could put Hmong people in those two columns, either one or one, and you could put white people in those same two columns, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's a difference because we all try here. We all try to be the best that we can be, right? Before we go to college, everybody's big dream is to go to college, right?
Okay.
And that's why I don't really see a difference in what race has to do with this.
Wait, what do you mean by like? Do you see your white peers and your Hmong?
Well, one of the things you mentioned, Kong, was you said you feel like you've seen some younger Hmong kids who speak to their elders or the older people differently than what you do.
Mm-hmm.
Are you suggesting that they learned how to do that by hanging out in white culture? I I mean, is that something that white culture has sort of eroded out of Hmong? Is it just something that's changing
I think
nowadays?
it's just really how you get raised.
Mm-hmm.
Cause I don't know. My parents have gotten like way more lenient
Mm-hmm.
with me, and I'm like 7 years younger than my siblings. But
Mm-hmm.
when my siblings were growing up, it was like nailed on their head that you should respect your elders. And I guess with like younger Hmong students, it's just not as nailed in their head as it was before. Because my parents are always like, hey, you have to respect me. I'm older than you, right? Because I'm your parent. You should respect me. That is your grandpa. You should respect him. But now it's just you don't. That isn't nailed in your head anymore, or as much. 'Cause I think it's a mixture of both, just them being Americanized and being raised differently.
I like what you said. I think the problem now is just, well, it's not a problem, but I mean, times are changing, right? And I think it's society as a whole. So, not just these Hmong kids are just acting like how you said, but some of these other kids, right? They're all doing
Sure.
the same thing, and I think we grow as a society, and then it just waters down lower and lower. Because I mean, like, I'm sure that you were taught to respect your elders, right? And then
Yeah,
it just
for
gets
sure.
watered. It's like a drip.
Mhm.
It gets watered down every single like generation. But I'm sure there are still people that respect elders and that stuff.
Sure.
But I'm just saying, society as a whole is changing.
I think it's interesting then too to talk about, you know, there's a larger culture that we're all operating in as well. You know, that's not just Hmong like you're talking about, or not just black or white or whatever, right? And that larger culture is going to affect each of those subcultures too, the minority, the majority, in a different way. And so I think that's interesting. You know, you often hear old white people too is be like, you know, all those young kids nowadays, they don't respect or they don't whatever. And I don't know how accurate that is. You know, I think every generation has said that to some degree. And that's part of how we deal with change over time, I think. I don't know. Now, uh, what about your experience with, say, Christian holidays, white holidays, versus some traditional Hmong festivals or Hmong holidays or anything? Is there tension at all? Is there conflict in any of that? Do you feel like it's all celebrated? Can you talk at all about that?
I think there could be conflict between Hmong people and themselves, right? So some people are Christian, some people are Catholic, and some people are shamanist,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I have a friend, he's Catholic, and a lot of all of those guys, they're Catholic and Christian and all that stuff, so they believe in God. But then I'm on the other side of the spectrum, right? I'm a shamanist. We believe in spirits, and we believe in a spirit plane. And some of those things just don't add up to each other, right? I think it's more in it of itself. Like, everybody likes to celebrate Christmas because you get gifts, right?
Yeah, it's fun.
Everybody does Thanksgiving because it's a whole family, right? I think all of these holidays, they don't collide with each other because we all share one thing, and that's coming together as a group, right? But then in those groups is where you can see division.
Hmm.
I think. I don't know.
We're just thinking out loud.
Yeah.
Kind of agree, yeah. Yeah, I see. You know, my sister got married pretty recently. Summer, yeah. They had an American wedding, and they're very Christian. You know, there was like no drinks. There was just you're dancing, having a good time. But a few months before that, we had our Hmong wedding, which is a lot of drinking. Just a lot of food just everywhere, and it was for me, or for the Christian, for my brother-in-law, they're Christian. They're very Christian. And so their family was like kind of awkwardly just standing there.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't drink. And so it was just kind of awkward.
So-
So they're just standing there. But then at the American wedding, they're like very, very like, yes, God is, we love God, blah blah blah, you know, and we love you and Jesus, you know, stuff like that. And that was kind of like awkward for us because my family doesn't really practice religion, so we're just kind of like, oh, blah 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 blah, kind of boring, you know. But I think there is some kind of division, but in the groups. But I think, you know, Christian holidays, you know, Easter, stuff like that. I think, you know, all people can celebrate it.
Devon, it looked like you wanted to say something earlier.
I don't.
Okay,
I'm
good.
not recalling anything.
Okay, good.
Hey,
I will look up that.
Kong, to clarify, was that wedding a wedding between a Hmong person and a white person, or was it
No, both Hmong.
both Hmong? Okay, I wasn't clear, I guess, on exactly what that was. Yeah. Do you feel like you have different pressures from home? You know, earlier, Kong, you talked about how your siblings were raised a little bit differently than you were, and maybe just you're the last one, so you know it's like, I'll let him do what he wants. But do you feel different pressures at home about maintaining Hmong culture or maintaining your Hmongness?
A little bit. The reason that kind of dyed my hair back was because of my parents. Like, oh, you need to have black hair because, you know, their reason is, light, which is like
Gangster.
You're a gangster if you dye your hair. But you know, I really think it's just kind of like keeping the tradition of, you know, looking Hmong.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they're kind of like, have some pride in being Hmong.
Mm-hmm.
But not really. They don't really like force me to go to like these Hmong weddings or these Hmong funerals.
Right.
Like they did with my siblings, where they kind of forced them to go.
Force them to go in the hopes of reinforcing tradition.
Yeah, just kind of like, hey, this is tradition.
Mhm.
This runs in our family, so you know you come with.
Which in some ways isn't any different than when I was growing up and
Yeah.
being told to go to church, you know what I mean? Or whatever, you know? It was a certain cultural background. You continue the tradition.
But then nowadays it's kind of like, yeah, you want to go? It's like, no, not really. Okay. Be safe. Stay home. Be safe. Yeah.
I think what's keeping me grounded to like my roots is my grandma, right? So she moved in with us, and she speaks no English at all.
Yeah.
She can speak some Spanish. I don't know how. I don't know how, but she speaks just like strictly Hmong, right? And you know, when she wasn't living with us, we didn't speak that much English or that much Hmong at home, right? It's just English. But now that she's here, I'm kind of getting back into the groove of relearning my Hmong, like relearning what has to be said so she can know what's going on, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's a thing that's keeping me grounded to like my native tongue, my language, and how Hmong I can really be. But I think it's the older people that are keeping this you know alive,
Sure.
like really alive.
Well, my grandma can still speak some Dutch. You know, she grew up second generation. Is that how you count them? Her first generation. Her folks came over, you know, and she still speaks some Dutch. And I don't think she's ever said take some pride in being Dutch, you know. I wonder though too what that would sound like coming out of a white person's mouth, and if that would be okay. Hey, take some pride in being white. I don't know. Is that the same? Is that different?
I guess it really depends on the
I think
environment.
people have a bias against white people because not all white people are bad, but some of them are really bad.
Come on now, Margie.
That's what I said. Not all white
Right.
people are bad.
I'm just messing.
And not all black people are bad, but some of them are bad.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
Not all Hmong people are bad, but some of them are bad.
Yeah.
And that we're always going to have those bad eggs.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Well, our bell rings, so we need to quit. because you guys all got something to do.
That was MegaPowers.
Thanks very much. Let's
Watch it not all be recorded. I'd be so sad.
Me too. We had
That is
such
so
good
awesome.
ideas. Imagine you didn't even click.